When I first started Oceania over 2 years ago now, one of my biggest goals was to create this intricate train line that connected up vast regions, neighborhoods, towns, industries, all to the center of the city. Now we have been chipping away at a lot of this over the years. Industry have a lovely little connection to Dundee Port. There's a long distance passenger service out to Paterson. And for the most part, the rail infrastructure in the city, it's looking pretty good down here, but it's not complete. Until today. Now that we're in the last stages of building up Matilda Point, we can finally get to the last 3 train stations and last stretch of train line within Dundee. This is very exciting. To make this build just a little bit more interesting, I also want to make these stations completely unique. So as we build these stations, they're also the catalyst of the neighborhoods we build them in. For what is such a tiny stretch of train line, this ends up being probably one of the most challenging stretches of the train line I've ever had to work with some very tricky terrain and some very challenging height differences, not to mention the scale of this area. It's mighty big, but then also mighty small. And I guess before building it, I always kind of knew that it was going to be a bit of a challenging spot, which is probably why I've left it for so long. But now that it's done, oh, it's just so nice. Like I said before, we do have a pretty good amount of infrastructure on the other side of the bay. So let's have a little look at it. Our furthest town is a little town that Dirty H built. This is such a beautiful little spot, and the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, is only tiny around here, just supporting a very suburban, very small little train station. The next one is very similar as well, another little tiny station as it is just serving a little suburb. And then we get into one of the larger stations. This is Chester Hill Station. Pretty modern, 4 platforms, a lot of trains stop here. The next one is for Hipsterville, a very tiny one, and then of course, we have our main one. This is Central. This is a transport hub for trams, trains, the metro, buses, everything is here. But this is where our train line is going to connect up. This is where it's going to terminate. Because the line that we're going to create is across the bay. So we've already got our train line that stretches all the way down underneath our downtown, our CBD, goes across the bay along the Anzac Bridge, and then goes into Matilda Point, which is a pretty substantial station there. That'll be the last fairly substantial station because the rest of them are going to be kind of small. They're going to be much smaller ones. In terms of inspiration, I am taking a lot of ideas from the train line that I am most familiar with. This is the Northern Line within Sydney. I used to catch this all the time to and from work. I don't catch it quite as much anymore, but I still live on the train line, so I do catch it a bit. So you will see some similarities with the train stations, the layout, the way it goes over the bridge. That's all taken from this. But then I also took inspiration from a lot of train lines within Australia. We actually got some pretty decent ones. The line from Perth to Fremantle, the way it stretches across this beachside, I take some inspiration from this. The station at Melbourne Zoo, this is a great idea, so you're going to be doing something like this as well. And then layout wise, it probably ends up being more like the line going out to Wellington and New Zealand more than anything else. So lots of great references here, and we'll be continuing to take more ideas and inspiration from other places, other great train lines that do quirky and interesting things. Please hit me up if you've got some ideas, because I always love to find out more about different train lines around the world that do kind of interesting things, not just sticking to the straight and narrow. I think that's why we all like train lines, they're kind of quirky. So, we do have 4 stations over at Matilda Point. We already have one that's built in the CBD, this one's a bit of a transport hub. We're gonna have a second one just outside of the CBD, this one's gonna be a classic inner city station. The next one will be smack bang in the middle of a neighborhood, and then the very last station of the Dundee line will be right next to our zoo, the Kangaroo. But I figured, why don't we start at the one that's in the middle of a neighborhood, just to get a bit of a feel of what this place is gonna look like. This neighborhood is going to be surrounding this train station, and this station is also going to be surrounded by a little bit of a commercial district. So I figured that it would probably be somewhat of a historical, or at least a neighborhood that has been here for a little while, with a station that is somewhat fairly old. One of the buildings, the houses, everything around it to also reflect that. Also the infrastructure too, sort of on the brink of needing a bit of refurbing. Maybe some parts have been just upgraded over time, but then other parts are still showing their age. I've got a lot of great stations to choose from, a lot of Australian and New Zealand assets, but the stations that I wanted to use were not going to fit in this area. I needed something that was going to be on the curvy side rather than something that was nice and straight. So this was the very first problem that I had with many of the stations in this area, because we are dealing with just some crazy terrain and some very wonky bits of train line. It means that we're going to have to make some more custom stations and get a little bit more technical when it comes to the different things that we're going to be placing around here. I opted to use a station network, which meant that I could turn it into any shape that I liked, but it also meant that I had to create my own station using a network instead of just placing down a custom asset instead, and just making sure that it fits into the right shape that the train is going to be making when it actually enters into the station. I made just a temporary line just to figure out where the train was going to go, and then that way I could align up our platform and make sure that the people were going to enter onto that platform rather than just floating in mid-air or doing something really weird. It's nothing worse than creating your custom layout and then realizing that the train doesn't even align up to the platform. I've made the mistake many times before, so hopefully I won't make it again. I'm sure that this is the sort of stuff that's going to flow on to City Skylines too, so let's hope I get it right from now on. With the layout now figured out, it was time to start getting into a little bit of detail work. The first thing that I wanted to do was I needed to find a building that was going to act as the main station building. This is something that would have been built when the station was built, but it's probably something that's not really used that much today. Maybe it's used as the office for the station, or maybe it's something that is used for administration or something like that. But with tickets now all online, there is no reason to go inside any of those buildings. Some of them are even just dedicated to a museum, but this one being a little bit more on the smaller side of thing, yeah, probably not really used for a museum. But I also want to show that the rest of this area was also fairly historical, with some older buildings that are holding up some of the commercial district around it, because we are very much sunken into the ground for this train line. A lot of the train line that we're going to be building is going to be much lower down than the rest of the buildings around this area. I mean, this is pretty typical, but it does make for a little bit of trickiness when it comes to figuring out what the rest of the area is going to look like. When you've got this trench, it can be a little bit tricky with height differences because the scale of some of these places can be a little bit tricky to work with. But I guess one of the saving graces of building a city based on Australia and New Zealand is that, well, these two countries, we've got a lot of trees. We've got a lot of trees within our cities, which means that I can go through and cover up a lot of my imperfections with some big trees, with some bushes. It's the same in New Zealand. There's plenty of trees over there as well. It's something that I think we all take for granted, because when you go overseas, that's something you definitely miss. A lot of our cities have got a lot of big trees, and I absolutely love it. It's also very helpful in Dundee. There's a lot of detail down here. I wanted to make sure that we had these retaining walls, these sandstone retaining walls all over the place, just holding up the bridge that goes over the top of the station, but then also holding up a lot of the commercial district that's surrounding this place. We have some, like I said, some very crazy height differences. As you can see, there's going to be some slight imperfections around the place. But it's just one of those places that, yeah, you're going to have some areas that are a bit wonky, a bit shonky, but kind of like it, you know? Some of these places are a little bit wonky and shonky. I keep the same place because I don't have a name for this neighborhood. If you've got a name, please hit me up. Now you might be questioning the way that I've connected up our train station to the road network. Well, don't you worry about it, because my plan is to ban all traffic except for emergency vehicles, and that way we're only going to have people walking down that little back alley. It is pedestrian only, and of course, back in the day, this would have been something that would have been driven on. People would just driven down to park at our little train station, but no, not anymore, not in 2023. This is pedestrian only, and it makes for a nice little district. If you are using Traffic President mod, it means that you can make these areas, these roads that aren't technically pedestrian streets, you can make them into pedestrian streets just by banning traffic, and it works really well. So this is turning out to be a lovely little train station with people now using it, which is absolutely fantastic, and people using the park on the other side. This whole area, in fact, turned out way better than I expected. But then it also took way longer, which meant that I just needed to shake things up a little bit and just try something a little bit different. watching right now is 45 minutes straight of building, condensed into just over a minute. This is a super slow simulation speed that I've sped up in post so that I can try and squeeze in as much as possible into what is a fairly short amount of time to build. 45 minutes is not a long time. And the benefit of this is that I'm not giving anything a second thought. Sometimes you can overthink things when you're building in City Skylines, but this is just going straight into it, going with my gut feeling and just fleshing out the suburb just how I think it probably should look like. And I think that's all it really needed. Obviously, some parts are going to need a little bit of extra work and some parts are going to need a little bit of fine tuning, but for the most part, I think this is how I'd like the suburb to look. To finish things off, I just want to add a little bit of extra density around some of the residential areas and then going through and adding in this industrial zone just to make things feel a little bit more complete. And we also need a bit of industry around here, just kind of completes the picture. But we're going to continue to flesh out this neighborhood and the other areas around it. But something that I'm going to leave for another day is this highway connection. I've got no idea how to connect up this neighborhood to this highway. I'm really struggling with this. So if you've got any ideas, please let me know. And what do you reckon about that 45-minute time lapse? There's 2 more of them in this episode, but I might end up doing more of them in my other episodes, so let me know. Something that I really love and appreciate about living in Sydney is just how many beaches we have. You know the famous ones, Bondi Beach and Manly Beach, but there are just so many that I've never been to and I've lived here my entire life. I feel like I'm constantly being recommended different beaches to go to that I've never heard of before. And what I love about them is that they all feel so different. Of course, there are some similarities depending on whereabouts you are going, but they always feel very unique and different and always have some sort of unique and interesting characteristic to them. The one that I'm building right now is based on the ones that you find around Sydney Bay, that we have all these little tiny beaches all around these suburban areas. And even within the city, you've got all these little beaches. They've all got a very historical, colonial feel to them. They've always got some sort of little bathhouse or shower room, and they've always got some sort of shark net that's meant to keep out the bull sharks because, yeah, you've got bull sharks within Sydney Bay, which are kind of terrifying when you realize how big and aggressive they are, though we all still swim in the bay, let's be honest. So I've made this beach into a parkland to encourage some tourists because I would really like to see people making the journey on the train line to visit this area, not just for the people who live here, but also to see people actually coming out this way. So I've added in this little walkway that stretches behind some of these historical mansions. This would be a beautiful little walk that would give you some beautiful views of the bay and of Dundee, but then you would also probably have a little bit of a sticky beak at some of those historical mansions and think, wouldn't it be nice to live there? Wouldn't it be lovely to live in that place? But then also connecting up some of these beaches and some of the other little tourist attractions around here. But they are kind of minor. They are just little places that you would probably go to if you were a local or found out about it from word of mouth. And let's be honest, it's these areas that really capture what your hometown or city or where you live is truly all about. And it's these sort of places that tourists always sort of miss because they don't really know about them, or they're not really recommended, or they don't really hear about them, or they're just here for such a short amount of time that they don't really get to really explore some of these more little nooks and crannies of the places that you live. If you're ever visiting Sydney, I always recommend to people to go for a walk around one of the headlands and just get one of the nice views of the city and just the surrounding areas, and just to walk through some of the bushier parts of the city, because these areas are usually full of trees and bush, and you can always spot some more unique wildlife than you can in some of the other areas. But what about you guys? What about your hometown? Do you have places that you recommend to tourists that tourists just never go? It's more of a local place. Let me know, I'm always curious. Now I say all that, but that little beach I just created, I don't know if I recommend people to go there. It's a little bit more rough around the edges, right below a train line, right below an industrial zone, and got lots of weeds poking through. But that's alright, I don't want all of them to be super nice and full of little swimming spots and places to hang out. This is more of your just typical, hey, let's just keep on walking. Let's just cross that one and we'll look the other way. We won't stop there. No one's gonna swim there. I decided to extend it out a little bit, make it so that rather than just having one little tiny dodgy beach, we'd have a much longer, but one side was dodgy, the other side was a little bit nicer. In fact, as I was extending out this beach, I was thinking about the different things I could do to encourage more tourists to come here and something that would be a little bit more unique. And then I was struck with just pure inspiration. I knew exactly what I wanted to build here. On one of the headlands in Sydney, there is the quarantine station. This was built back in the 1830s. Ships that were coming into Sydney at the time who were carrying people with infectious diseases, such as smallpox or the bubonic plague. So lots of those real deadly diseases, people were quarantined here before going into the general public. So lots of interesting history and of course, ghost stories. In fact, my mum back in the day used to take ghost tours here, and me and my brother as little tuckers would run around with our Nerf guns, running in and out of some of these buildings. One of our favorites was the old shower block, which I wouldn't have the balls to go into at night anymore, but back in the day, yeah, no worries. And to be honest, these days the quarantine station isn't even that spooky anymore. It's become pretty bougie, it's known as the Q station, and all those old real spooky places, like the boiler room or the morgue, and even the hospitals, they're all now expensive cafes and restaurants and hotels, and even gift shops. This place is pretty nice now. I reckon it's still got a little bit of a spooky charm, but those old dilapidated buildings back in the 90s, yeah, that was the real stuff back then. So is this going to be the quarantine station of Dundee? Well, I don't really know. I've actually left it a little bit open and I've left it a little bit ambiguous because I'd love to know from you guys, what do you think we call this place? Is this the quarantine station of Dundee? What else can we add? How else are we going to attract people? Do we add a hotel here? Let me know and we'll get back here. Now for an episode that is all about trains and train lines and public transport, we have taken a slight detour. We are now focusing on some other things. Well, that is kind of all part of it because this is, of course, an episode dedicated to train lines, but I am also trying to make sure that all these places are a little bit fleshed out and that our train line really has a reason to be there. I know there's a couple of things out here at the moment. We've got the beginnings of our zoo and a couple of little houses, but there needs to be more. There needs to be a suburb. There needs to be a reason why people want to go out this way in the first place. Or why do people want to live here? I know we've got a zoo, we've got a couple of nice things, but in terms of public transport, there's nothing at the moment. Before I got to any of that stuff though, I first had to figure out what this highway was going to do. Right next to the train line like this just wasn't working. I had no room for a train station. So I decided that this thing would go closer to the mountains over here. And I thought that this was going to give me enough room to at least build some sort of station and then also expand out a little bit of the road layout and also a little bit of the housing. But as you can see, we do have some goofy behavior when it comes to some of the height differences, and this was causing a bit of a headache. So I decided that rather than the highway being above ground the entire time, instead it'd poke its way through the mountain just a little bit. And this would give me just a little bit of extra room, but then also make sure that I could actually fit in a train station. With our highway now tucked away inside the mountain, it was time to start getting into some of the structures. I started with our train station, placing it somewhat close to our zoo so that some people can walk, but then we'll also have some sort of shuttle going up there. I also wanted it to be somewhat of a short walk for people who lived around the area, but then we're also going to be placing a car park. Now of course, that's not ideal. You don't really want people driving to the train station, but in an area like this, when you've still got quite a lot of people living far enough away from the train station, then yeah, people are going to drive to the station and then jump on a train. It's not ideal, but it is realistic. With trains now arriving and people rejoicing, it was time to get back to some rapid expansion. SimCity 2013 might suck, but this music absolutely slaps. I'll never get tired of listening to this song. Once I finished off the station, I decided to work on the mountainside, and honestly, I did not expect to get this much done. There is no detail in these suburbs. We are not going to get much closer than where we are right now, but these houses are absolutely beautiful. These are some New Zealand houses that I think are just perfect for this area, a little bit more modern and a little bit more suited for an area like this. And with that, this area was pretty much done. We're going to return here at some stage just to add in those finer details. We're going to give it a name. We're going to add in those little bits and pieces. We're going to finish off that zoo. But for now, we gotta get to this other station. So this station right here, this is gonna be a little bit more of an inner city, a little bit closer to the downtown, a little bit more built up. And what you're watching me do right now is figure out what the train line is going to do. Because at first, I was going to do the train line that is already here, but then I realized that in order to place down another station, I really needed to figure out what the road layout was gonna do and make some more straight sections for this train line. But all this right here, this is the hardest part of the train line. There is some pretty extreme height differences, but that's not even the most difficult part. The most difficult part is trying to make it so that we've got something that looks fairly realistic in terms of the layout of this train line. But no matter how hard I tried, this just wasn't working. As much as I really didn't want to build another custom station, I really just wanted to place just another pre-made station and then detail around it. But the straight sections, they weren't working, the layout just was all over the place, and the corners were far too extreme. It just wasn't gonna work, so I deleted it and we got back to making a custom one. And layout is probably the most important thing to me when it comes to building cities and scale and trying to make things work with the whole idea of your city in place. It's really tricky and it's something that I definitely overthink and something that I probably don't really need to do every single time, but for me, it just didn't sit right. It just didn't feel like that would exist within a city at this scale. Of course, this is a city that is scaled down. We are always building cities that are scaled down, but it just didn't really feel like a section like that would exist in a city like this. And I know that a custom station, in the end, is going to be the right choice, but at the time, man, it really just felt like I was putting a lot of extra effort in for something that wasn't really going to matter. But seeing as we were going for a custom one now, I really wanted to go all out, make sure that this one was going to feel like it was a little bit more in terms of infrastructure. It felt like it was going to be a little bit busier, with more people living and working in this area. I also wanted to make sure that we were going to show that it has changed over time, that maybe it wasn't always this developed and some changes have been made to the infrastructure around here. This is another elevated station and I wanted the footpath connection to be up on the main road because this is where most people are going to be walking and catching buses and getting to and from other areas around the city. This is slightly inspired by St. Leonard's Station, but we've got a lot of stations around the Northern Line that are kind of similar to this, that have changed over time, a little bit of extra infrastructure, and just developed as the area around it has developed. I've connected up the station using some elevated paths and am crossing my fingers and toes to hopefully see some people actually using it. At this point, I don't really know if they are going to use it, and I'm sort of just hoping that they will. So when I hit play and I saw that person making their way onto the platform, oh man, I was so stoked. Sometimes City Skylines, things just work. A lot of times things don't work, but when things work, it's just beautiful, man. Dear friends, thank you all so much for watching today's episode of Oceania. I hope you've all enjoyed it. This one was a fun one to put together. I think this is probably one of my better structured episodes. I've been spending way longer editing these days, but I am at a place where I'm pretty happy with how my videos are turning out at the moment. So I'm sorry if videos aren't quite as regular as they used to be. I'm actually really enjoying the editing process and putting a little bit of extra work into some of these videos. Next weekend might be a Sunset City live stream. I don't know if I'll have a video out in time, but I'll do my best. Got a bit of a busy week. And then the next Oceania episode will most probably be in the same area, so do let me know if you got any ideas for any of the things that we've been working on. If you've enjoyed the video, then leaving a like or subscribing would be very much appreciated. And if you ever want to go the next step further and support the channel over on Patreon, that would also be very much appreciated. Just like these wonderful people. Logan Scarborough, Robert Fagan, GD, Grant Fraser, Ronan Kelly, Bobby LA, Stephen Badassa, Leo Horton, Cheffer Flex, Yezon Wang, and Dan Foster. Cheers legends, catch you all next time, see ya!